Hello there, it's your host Sharon Lin and welcome back to Come Along. For today's show, we have a guest all the way from Belgium for you. It's artist David Claerbout. He actually currently has a solo show at the Taipei Fine Arts Museum that will be on till June 25th, so make sure to check it out. His work combines elements of photography, video, digital tech, and many more. I had the chance to chat with him during his time in Taipei in late March, and this was actually not his first time in Taiwan. So without further ado, let's hop right in. Hello listeners, welcome back to Come Along. I'm your host Sharon Lin, and today with me in the studio we have a very, very special guest, David Claerbout.
Hello everyone.
So David is an artist, and it's actually not his first time in Taiwan. So David, you were here in Taiwan, I believe in 2004 with the Taipei Biennale. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So it's now your second time here?
Yes. We got the invitation of the Fine Arts Museum like 5-6 months ago to make a solo show in this rather gigantic space at the museum. I was looking forward from day one.
So listeners, I also want to give a little spiel of why David is here. So he has a solo show now on at the Taipei Fine Arts Museum titled Meditation in Peace, Meditation in Pieces, which is already on and it will run till June the 25th, and I highly recommend you to check it out. Then let's jump right in. So I was actually at the opening and it was really amazing, and I loved the tour that you gave us. So let's talk about the close, which is the first piece that visitors would see when they walk into your solo show. So could you tell us more a little bit of why you wanted to create a piece like the close?
When we enter into the spaces, the first piece we see is the close, and it's also the only piece that has this rather monumental soundtrack.
Yes.
While the other works are mainly silent, so which gives this meditative aspect to the exhibition, except of course for the close. And the close at the same time, it has a bit of weird title, a close. It's both referring to what's known as a dead-end street or a dead-end alley, but it's also associated with being close to something or to someone. And it's the most recent film I made. I spent, I believe, something like 1.5 decades making it. It really had one could say it's a technical difficulty, but the viewer, the people who visit the exhibition, they don't notice this technical difficulty.
Yes.
That's because we overwon it in that more than a decade of research for the piece. But it's a conflict between two states of cinema, or two ways of filming. And one is situated very early in the history of cinema, and one is situated in our time and is made entirely out of CGI imagery. But you can't tell where the transition goes from one state to the other, and that was the difficulty in creating the film.
Yes, not until your tour that I realized, oh my goodness, some parts of it is quote-unquote not real. Right. And could you tell us more of what part is filmed from life and what is not? Or feel free to skip that if you want the listeners to try to.
Maybe I should start with saying that when we think about images, about technological images to be precise, so images, representations.
Yes.
In fact, we think of them as real because we believe in them. But none of the representations that we have seen throughout history are real. They are all constructions. They're all, one could say, simulations that our eyes believe. The most accurate demonstration of that is that we lose touch with those images as they age. So when we think of the close, I really chose images of around the year 1910, filmed in, let's say, industrial Europe. It's in fact in Glasgow, in one of these back alleys in Glasgow, filmed with poor people who have no voice, but they have no voice twice, so they don't have a voice technically, because at the time there was no device to record sound.
Yes.
But they also didn't have a voice politically, so they also they were not able to vote. They were not able to open their mouth to say what they thought. But at the same time, they're alienated from us in time. They're far away, and the fashion is different.
Yes.
Like none of the children probably had an education. because they were just working in the factories, kind of far away from us. And I thought that was interesting as a point of departure. But what I also found fascinating is that there were, in fact, many cinematographers who were working on their own or with an assistant, and who went out in the streets and they recorded street life. I got inspired by gathering much of that material through the years. And I always was guessing what were they saying, what were they doing. And in the end, I found out that many of those scenes that we see and that we take for granted as being authentic were in fact put into scene. There was the person that held that had the camera on a tripod usually had a director also, and someone directing them what to do in front of the camera. So the whole thing was quite artificial. I set out to study that material and to copy it.
Ah, okay.
So very little of the original material of the films and the film footage is present, but they feel very real because they have been studied very closely.
And would you say, is the little boy real, quote unquote real, in your piece?
The little boy feels very real, very spontaneous and non-directed, and I really filmed street life in a one-on-one situation with people who were not aware of the camera, so to speak. But actually much of that child is a construction. I would say it's a hybrid. It's a one-on-one film, but the other part is then CGI and is in fact a recording of a zombie, I would say. It's a person who's not there, but whose skin and hair and presence looks very real, but is in fact just a 3D shell.
Oh, wow. Oh, I love the way you put it. When you're there, I wonder, because I feel like on site, there isn't much information to sort of inform the visitors what they would be faced with. So is this on purpose? And do you feel like this might create a certain distance you might want or might not want with the audience?
Yeah, it's on purpose. Like I will sometimes, the titles for my pieces will sometimes be very precise with the date and when relate. So it's relating to the image that we have used as an inspiration or as a point of departure. But generally, I like images to be undefinable, so that we couldn't give them an exact tag or a name, or no precise situation, no drama, no dead people, no tragedy, no explicit situations, where I'm looking for images that are already, when they're freshly made, they look like images that are remembered, that come from memory. And usually I'm also often criticized for that, because nowadays we like to know all the details and all the credentials for an image, which seems to help us believing in that image. But I do the opposite. I try to take away information, and I think also one should accidentally fall upon an image. This is what I'm looking forward to in always, is that my ideal spectator is someone who has no information whatsoever.
Great. So I think last week I qualified. I have little to no information. So you do read reviews of your exhibits and shows?
I used to read them more passionately than I do nowadays.
Okay, good. Because I know from different artists and movie actors, they said that they tend to drop that because they don't know what kind of reviews that people are writing about them, about their work, and sometimes it's very devastating.
You know, I'm more interested in the negative reviews, to be honest, because they're kind of blunt and I also learn about them. Never mind. I mean, I also realize that often when quick reviews are being written, they're often being written according to the text that was kind of spoon-fed to the journalist. So there's not always a lot of time to review an exhibition. This is something I notice in like the 20 years that I'm working, is that there's less time to investigate the work.
Speaking of time, I feel like time, and you mentioned memory, I feel it very strongly, the presence of these themes in your work. And in your previous interview that you did, you mentioned that you are trying to you are very interested in a conflict of so-called clock time versus a term called heterochrony. You mentioned that it's probably a French word.
Heterochrony. It's a term that, it's really not a coincidence that this came from the French. So I have French friends who love cinema and who are, I'm always amazed with how great theoretically they have a backup. And then one day someone said, could we define your work as heterochrony? And I was like baffled. I said, wow, that's an interesting term, because
Yeah, what does it mean? What does the term mean?
we kind of monochrony, we could understand a little bit what that means. That's so singular time, and that would be clock time. So clock time according to the seconds, to what we know as atomic time, so exact definition of time. And then heterochrony probably would be more multiplicity of times, of many kinds of experiencing times. But what I found interesting was that with the term heterochrony, that it actually said something like there would be many classes of time. But what I'm fighting for is that time wouldn't have a class at all. And that time would be something stretchable, highly subjective. Something that goes with your breathing, that goes with the seasons, that goes with the state in which you're in. But that actually doesn't correspond to any particular category. And this is something I'm looking forward to. Of course, the paradox of my work is that I work in film, and film is, of course, listens to this dictatorship of the clock.
Yeah.
Because without this chronological machinery, we wouldn't have film. And if you think about it, in fact, highly defined time is everywhere around us.
Yeah, just everywhere in this studio we have, I don't know, 6.
Exactly. We look at the
Clocks going
light
on.
above us. It has a certain frequency in hertz defined. Our mobile phones, the films we look at, they're all. I think that generates a certain fatigue at one point, because our eyes are, although they love to be fooled. And when we look at the simulation of movement in film, our eyes can easily be fooled. We know that. And our bodies they love to be, to go along with those simulations of time. But in fact, we're not programmed to be that way. And it is almost paradoxically that I'm looking to work in film and to dig out certain experiences of time, which seems to come from a different time.
It reminds me of this feeling that I've always felt, actually. And when you said that the experience of time is most of the times very subjective, I was reminded of this feeling. It's like, I remember it was from a movie, or it could be something related to Einstein, but hey, I'm not a genius in physics. I don't know much about the theory that he mentioned. So it's like a feeling that when you're doing something you love, you're doing something that makes you go into a flow state. Or as simple as you're sitting next to someone you have a huge crush on. An hour felt like only seconds. And it reminded me of that feeling that you're trying to describe, and the subjectivity of how we experience time.
In fact, we often think of our bodies as having a certain clock, but through the years I read up a little bit about it, and it's not. We don't really have clocks.
No,
what we have,
especially on weekends, we just
no. We're very adaptable. We adapt ourselves easily. That's something else. But we're not really a walking clock on two legs.
Oh, I wish sometimes, but no. I think in general, no, we're not. And I find that in your work, as you mentioned, you often bring together two conflicting elements or feelings.
Yeah.
Like in Wildfire. Could you tell us a little bit more? So listeners, an image to give you. So it's a very calming wood, but also you would see and experience in a digital form a wildfire, which usually is associated with anxiety, with rage, with danger, with the unknown, but is paired up with a very calming opening when you first step close into this work. Could you tell us more?
As with many of the other works, my point of departure usually is a very simple phenomenon that we can kind of imagine with our eyes closed. And with Wildfire, I was thinking about the fear of, and being programmed to run away from fire
Yes.
when we're close to it. But I felt that fire could also have something very meditative and soothing, and
I agree,
that
yeah.
became the base of the project, is to have fire that is where the qualities of fire and of this anxiety that is associated with fire exchanges with the other quality of fire as that which gives energy and
Gives life.
gives lives, and which is responsible in the end for our consciousness, because fire is, we use about 20 to 25% of our brain energy, of our energy goes to our brain, and we could never do this by chewing on grass. So we needed fire to do that. So we have on one hand, we have this domesticated, controlled fire, which we love, and then the fire as fear. And so in the film, what you see are, again, two states. You have half of the film is the forest intact and with water, birds, and you see the shapes of the trees, which have... I used a type of tree which has a certain flame shape already.
Yeah, the
in
leaves
it.
part.
And then very softly, this light is exchanged, almost in a surreal way, for red fire, and that brings me to the other piece that's in the film, which is based upon the 1967 Jungle Book, which is also all about the red flame, the discovery of the red flame, and what's his name? King Louis wants to find out from Mowgli how to domesticate or how to get grip of this red flame,
the red flower.
the red. Oh yeah, exactly. You and but he can't, because that's something that's for human beings.
Yes.
And so there's this exchange of qualities between what's meditative and what's violent. And I've always worked with two realities. I always try to work with two realities that contradict one another. And the reason why I like to do that in film is because in film we can use montage, we can cut back and forward in time, but I don't really do that. I like to keep my phenomena in a single space, so that it feels very soothing and very almost sleep-inducing sometimes.
Yes, because I can totally picture like the piece you mentioned, which is also in your solo show this time, The Pure Necessity. Because when you go experience it, there are bean bags that you can sit on and experience the piece. I can totally picture some people, I don't know, almost taking a nap, which is, I don't know, is this echoing that this is a very meditative experience?
Exactly. You know where that comes from? I think mostly, nowadays not so much anymore, but before, let's say a film production was a very expensive thing.
Yes.
And so it's always hunting after your attention. And I was always fascinated with this idea that film is expensive and that time in film is expensive.
Yes.
And that we should get as much as possible of your attention while we can. And I like to work with the opposite. And I like to say, like, look, guys and girls, it's okay to fall asleep. Maybe a cinema is a place, you have a comfy seat. Why don't you just take a nap? And because of the monetization of film, this isn't really considered to be
it's not encouraged.
Tradition, but I think this is slowly changing. And the films I make are there to have these two faces. On one hand, I think they really grasp your consciousness. And if you stay a while in front of them, I think your experience of time changes. But on the other hand, if you slide off, if you slide away, and if you doze away, and this often also generates irritation with people who will say like, really, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And then so it's often like divided in two camps of people who hate it and others who kind of get along and who love it. Yeah. So it divides as much as it unites, it divides as much as it reconciles.
For sure. And usually many of my friends, when they try to relate to an artist's work in an art museum, for example, I already picture some of them would say, what does this mean? And what is that? And why are we seeing this here in this frame? And I think those are actually very good questions. And I want to talk about your piece, the aircraft. So when I felt it was, when you said that, it gave us some leads, which part of it is so-called real and which part is not.
Right.
So there's a gigantic plane in the footage that visitors would see. Is that filmed from life, or how was it created?
Yeah, so you see, so the title of the piece is Aircraft Final Assembly Line, and it's based upon a found image from an American airplane being manufactured somewhere in the United States shortly after the Second World War. And it's kind of spectacular in terms of what you see. It's very monumental. You see, and this is something that I do think is important, because I think memory likes a good composition. And when the visitors in the museum leave, they need to take this strong composition with them, because that's what they remember.
That's what I remembered.
They don't just come back. The metaphor with the piece was like, look, Dracula doesn't have he doesn't have a reflection in the mirror. So what we did is we found a space which was quite similar to this big hangar in which this aircraft is being manufactured, and we emptied everything out. So there's not a single object in that space. It's a huge space. And the only thing that you see which is real is the camera movement. So there is, in fact, it's very absurdistic. You should see the stage shots. It's a whole crew being there, but there's no actors. There's no backdrop. There's nothing. It's just a big empty hall. In fact, I'm lying. There are a few actors every now and then passing by. And so it's a bit surreal to see the set images of that film, because you see people filming nothing.
Yes. This is so fascinating.
And the reason why I found that important was I did want to, over time, over the course of minutes, I did want to generate a sense that there is a camera in that virtual space. All the rest of the space is made in CGI. The light, the airplane, which is in beautiful aluminium.
Yes.
And which is brand new, but at the same time feels old, because it is an old airplane. These things from the past, they're part ghost, because they're situated in the past. But I also wanted to make them very tactile. I also wanted to make them very real.
Oh, yeah. It looks
the wood,
so real.
the concrete, and especially the light. The way the light is bumping and reflecting everywhere.
Yes, I really want to talk about the reflection. So near the nose of a plane, which the plane wasn't there. There wasn't a plane on site. No. So this was so fascinating. I kept on looking at the reflection, and you really feel that there is light and dark in that space, but it's all digitally generated. Yeah,
and we are believers, aren't we? We like to crave. We crave for the real. So we crave for authentication, and
I feel like that should be on a T-shirt. It's just so great. Just in inspiration for your merch.
And we're really believers. Like, we like to think that we're in control of what we see.
Yes.
But we're absolutely not. We're just craving for authentication all the time. But I think what's typical for our age is that we are losing that, and that we have to be wary of images, and there's a certain stress associated with that. And I think we can feel that politically and socially, we can feel this increasing. Like, we don't know if the information we're having, we're increasingly skeptical about that information. And so there's a certain pressure about it. And it's a little bit what I would describe as hallucinating. When we see, in fact, on a neurological level, we do hallucinate every day of our lives, but we don't notice that, because we would get crazy from one moment to the next. Yes. But we do hallucinate. That's a fact of life. But to be aware of your consciousness of that, that's of course stressful. And I think that's typical for our time. I think it's we'll see how that evolves. But what's clear to me is that we live in an age where what's happening to us is what happened to painting around the 1840s, when photography was invented. And now this happens to the camera. We are no longer certain of that system, of that truth system that once upon a time was painting. And nowadays we are exchanging the products of the camera, the images that the camera was making for us. We are exchanging that for something new, but it's not clear what something new is.
And I have to ask you, since we're talking about this, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence and AI's application in art?
To be very honest, I don't follow it too much, but I'm, of course, in the middle of that technology. So I do work with AI. And, for example, we scale up movies or details of an image that we need to have in higher definition, and we work with AI to
as a tool
to help us. For example, in the aircraft, we used it to make it higher definition image, and it's very impressive. AI does a great job. I am in no way concerned that AI would take over. We are really underestimating our own consciousness. AI is stupid. It's so it's so far away from being anywhere near what we can do. But then more importantly, I think, as a word of warning, I would say, let's just not think that our brains are our beings. We are incorporated beings. So we are not a processor inside the casing. We are a marvelous creature that has evolved millions of years. And how would a computing device that's been going on for, like, let's say 25 years of daily life,
so,
how would that? It's completely dumb to think that but of course I understand,
at least for now, but we never know.
I understand the fear of being domesticated by computing, blah blah blah.
I think also fear of the unknown, because I remember after your tour we had a little chat, and you said that how we experience reality, so-called reality, everybody is different. And it reminds me of this feeling I've been thinking about so much, is if another person, or say a computer, is thinking in a way that's different from how you think. Does that mean it's not thinking? I don't think so. It just means that you're different.
No, of course, there is something there with AI and with, let's say, our brain function that is associated with it, which is correct, is that it makes neural connections, synaptic connections. I find that very fascinating, is that we realize that, in fact, there is a device out there that is capable of, that has the capacity of our brains. And, of course, this tells a lot about how we think about our brains and what we don't know about it. And what I find so fascinating with technology, any technology, whether it's hydraulic or a steam engine or mechanistic or computing, is that it tells us so much about the way we think about our bodies and about the way we live and about the way we function. So I somehow have a difficulty explaining that to the general audience, because somehow technicians, so the people who develop AI and the people who develop computers and let's say imaging technologies, they never meet the people who do research on the brain and on cognitive sciences. It's very weird, but they're actually researching the same thing.
Yes.
But because they're highly specialized in their own field, they never meet. And there's one thing that I realized, and my mouth fell open to the ground when I realized that those technologies that are used in image making, or CGI, in fact do nothing else, but they're not aware of it, but they do nothing else than replicating the processes that we use to construct an image in our brain. It's almost amazing how precise this one-on-one correlation is sometimes.
It's really jaw-dropping, because this reminds you. Sorry, go on.
No. Well, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm just thinking, like, for example, the other day I was reading up on how a memory is constructed, and then came this word compression. And of course, when we use digital compression in images,
also in like
when
sound,
we use memory, we use compressed images of those memories, And one of the consequences of that is that we actually don't remember moving images because our brains need to store so much information. What is remembered is highly compressed and is just fragments of that lived experience. And these are these kind of wonderful correlations between technology and experienced life, isn't it?
Yes, I feel so strongly because these are also the things that I love to read about. And I would just love to, I don't know, have a book club together with you and we can talk about this on and on. And I feel like what you mentioned is how different people, they are trying to research or find sort of a solution or get to know more about certain things like CGI and how we process information and memory. They're actually very similar.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, a couple of years ago, you did an interview with Louisiana Channel, where you mentioned that most of the people you work with who are on your team in your studio, they're actually not trained in the thing that they're doing right now. They're not professionally trained people in a certain field. And you actually said you prefer this way because what I gather is you prefer this interdisciplinary nature, this self-taught passion and thinking outside the box. And it echoes so well with what you said, that researchers and artists or different people, we're actually trying to find a path to a very similar or the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's true that it's often when, like, if you work with people who are highly skilled, highly specialized from a very young age, like, for example, when I was working with the animators in the Pure Necessity, in the Disney reconstruction, you're working with people who are highly religious in what they're doing.
I love this. Yeah, I love the way you put it. Yeah.
And it can be so difficult to get them to other thoughts.
Yes.
To like have a second opinion on things. And that's why I like to work with failed artists or failed technicians, because they often, after a while, they blossom and they have a hybrid way of working and thinking, which I like a lot.
I strongly agree,
So there will usually be artists who think differently already from the beginning, or sometimes people who didn't have any training at all and who worked very hard to, box their way up in their skill. And you can never tell whether, the people who you're going to work with, it's often so those who make the biggest impression on you, when you talk to them, they're sometimes disappointing, and and those of whom you were a bit skeptical about, they blossom and they become like really great people to work with. You can never tell, really.
Do you know this wonderful film called The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch? It's about a story of Alan Turing. Have you watched this?
Oh, yeah. I must admit, I rarely watch film.
Okay, it's one of my favorite films. Then it reminds me of this quote that I love so much. He said something like, "It's always someone who no one imagines anything of does something that no one could imagine." And I feel like this echoes very well with the feeling you're describing, working with people on your team who are very wonderful and usually not the people that, who are so quote unquote trained in a certain way to be, conditioned in a certain way, and you enjoy that process.
Yeah, I'm always like, I love to read up on, for example, on history, and if you look back at how the First World War came about, for example, then you see this process happening of when you write a script for something and you're highly skilled and highly competitive and highly professional on something, then what will happen is that you grow towards the realization of what you were trained to do. And you grow towards a moment in time where you say, okay, now is the time. What we were trained to do, this will happen. And for example, the German army at that time, they were trained in case it would happen that we would have a conflict. And what you realize is that we're not just preparing for the case that something terrible would happen. They were actually preparing to do it themselves. And this is what you might get with professionals, is that they're now I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it might be that you work with people who cannot step out of what they were trained to do. And that brings me to a characteristic of the machine or of computing, is that the problem with it, an AI in that extension, is that it doesn't have a social, it doesn't have any social experience. which took millions of years ago to develop, or millions of years to develop. So it doesn't have that. It has simulations of that.
Yes.
And that brings me to the autistic character of computation. Is that it's very good when it's isolated, but the moment you throw it into all those unexpected combinations, and this is where I don't believe in AI. I think AI will. I think what's typical is that we project our own expectations and fears into AI.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. Yeah.
And therefore, of course, if we program it to work towards a catastrophe, we will unavoidably create that catastrophe.
Because one thing that I chat with some researchers I know in machine learning, at least from my understanding, I work in the arts and I love working in this field, is what I find sort of, at least from my understanding, humans, well, if I can say like differences between humans and computers now is we are afraid of, say, death. We're afraid of the unknown. But computers, do they die? Are they afraid of death? At least for me, I don't know. And I think this is maybe one of the core differences between us and, say, a computer or a AI, because we have this very strong fear. So this sort of drives us to do things that are irrational. Like we fall in love because we don't want this life to go wasted, because we all one day would end up the same, as ashes and atoms when we all die. But computers, they probably they won't, or they will, but in a different way. So I think this is something that's really, it's a philosophical field that I always love to dive into. And I felt this sense in your work, and now getting to know more, you're sharing your story with us. And you said that when you were a kid, you noticed your passion for art at a very young age, but you once felt that a little bit, you were struggling a little bit because you thought, what do I have to offer to the art world? Because you once felt that all that could be done in art has already been done in a way. But looking back now, how would you tell that little kid? And do you have any words of encouragement for younger artists?
Oh yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you like to think that our stories are all the same, but they're all different.
Different yet the same. Yeah, why not be both?
Yeah, like I mean, it's so important to have the time and the money to train young artists and to give them the time to lose themselves and to find themselves and to,
make
at
mistakes.
a young age, that's so important. And I would say try not to specialize and be unhappy. As a young artist, be unhappy. It's not a problem, because you have an entire life ahead of you to be happy.
Oh, yeah.
So it's okay. But
it's okay.
But what I would say is start very young. I think that's important. This is I think a misunderstanding that because the visual arts and artists, they are very free. They're considered to be, to not have a particular skill, but I would disagree.
Oh, I disagree, but I can understand why most people think like that. Like, why do we need art?
I think every single one who's good at something has been working on it for many, many years, and knows very well what they're doing. So I think start early. And know what you were obsessed with when I think about my youth, I was very bad at sculpture. I had a lot of time on my hands to draw and to paint and I was a draftsman.
You started with like painting.
I was a draftsman. I was always on paper. I was always working on paper.
Yeah.
But then when I started three-dimensionally, I was so bad. I took such a long time, wasted so much material, and I was always at the end I always said, why am I doing this? And so I felt that I was very keen on the flat surface, on everything that was on paper, and I loved imitating. I loved, having. I mean, I was working with photography. I was always drawing after photographs, which, by the way, the majority of painters nowadays do. They work with photographic representation somehow, and I was very keen on that. I drew many years after the nude model. I had a very classical training, and I would say do the way a musician would do. It's like if you're really hungry for the arts, you will want to find out more, and you will want to want to experiment, but don't go along with for a number of years of imitating and doing what your ancestors did. It's okay to be academic for a number of years, and to be the slave of the teacher, so to speak. And it's okay to lose yourself in that, but give it time.
Give it time.
Yeah.
And did you ever want to give up, and you find it too frustrating, and you thought this might not be a path for you?
Well, I had the fortune to be not good with anything else, so I didn't have an alternative.
I love this. Then how was the path of you moving from something on paper, paintings, drawings, to working with video and digital tech?
It is quite similar, but when I started working with photography and with CGI and with constructed images, I didn't realize that. The thing that was crucial for me is that I could lose myself in images that I could appropriate from other photographers that other people had made. And I had a clear preference for non-moving images. I always thought they told bigger stories than moving images, because moving images captivate your attention. But I was an amateur. I was a non-skilled. I had really very short training in photography, and I felt really handicapped. And I think this handicap taught me a lot. The fact that I was hungry to work with technological images, but I had no skill. And as we evolved and the studio grew bigger, and I worked with more professional people, I learned a lot. And this is the process. It's like keep on learning. Never stop. Keep on being hungry.
Yeah.
But don't get too excited with technology, because that you might fall into the trap of running after technology, and that's not what it should be about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good word of sort of warning in a sense. And I'm curious, how much of yourself do you see in your creation process? And how much of yourself do you see in the final result?
Well, I don't know what myself is, but I do know certain ambitions. I do really realize, and I'm willing to fight for those ambitions. One of them being, I think we touched upon it already, was that you would sit together with an image, and even with minimalistic interventions, that image would evolve into something else. It would get a second chance, and you would leave the room with another image, and therefore with a different experience. What I'm fighting for is basically the inefficiency of time. Like, give to time something that you would experience, let's say, in a church, or on holidays, or when you don't employ time as something
that you have to be productive or create something out of it.
Time as something unproductive, and it's a pity that we've pushed unproductivity in a corner together, like other phenomena such as silence versus noise, or speed versus slow motion. We associate the slow motion and the silence with something negative, as if it's a lack of something. But it isn't a lack of something. It's actually a richness in itself. And unproductivity is a richness in itself.
And that should be on it again. That should be on a T-shirt. I would totally buy that T-shirt. So, sort of wrapping up this interview and rolling out the imaginary red carpet for you. Unfortunately, we don't have a real red carpet. So, being back in Taiwan again, do you picture yourself including some elements or the experience of your time here in your future work?
I'm pretty sure I would. There's something wonderful in when I look at the map. So I'm sure an idea would come out of that at one point or another. There's a certain beauty about the way Taiwan is situated in the world, and the way it handles its history. And I think probably I would like to do something with that, because I think that's something quite unique.
And if I remember it correctly, this solo show is your first ever solo show in Asia. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Oh, so why Taipei, Taiwan?
Somehow, things come together. I do have family in Taiwan,
Oh, really?
so it's kind of nice that you don't expect it, but you really like to say yes, very gladly to this. It's very nice. It somehow comes all together. So it's a little bit like coming home as well.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. So any professional or personal updates that you'd like to share with the RTI listeners?
Oh, well, maybe just the works on which we're... So follow our social, social media, like
social media.
Instagram.
So where can people find you other than Instagram?
Well, there's a good website, and I'm very keen on a lot of lectures, so everything that's good to read is also there. And we're working on, at the moment, I'm working on a tree. I'm making a tree.
A tree?
Which is growing back in time, so it's growing backwards in time.
Cool.
So, and then the other thing is we're also working on an explosion. And it's a film with two birds which are caught up in an explosion, so they're dying. But it's also a film about the same two birds which are happily sitting together in a forest. So it's all about those two faces of one reality.
Yeah, the conflict. And I would say the sublime in a way that people could experience in a way.
Yeah, in a way the sublime is a light that is in one way too brilliant to look into, but at the same time it's that light which is magnificent.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by, David, on your very, very busy schedule in Taipei, and it's been a great pleasure to chat with you.
Welcome. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, and I do hope that when you're back, hit us up.
Thank you.
So listeners, thank you for joining today's show. I hope you're having a great day or evening wherever you are. Take care. Bye.